One.
Hi, this is our podcast, the Nighthawk's Newscast. I'm Margery, and I'm here with Noah to talk about the era before and during the civil rights.
Yeah.
This was very important in our history, where many people made a difference and gave us equality and the natural born rights we have today. So, Noah, when you hear the word leadership, what do you think of?
Well, when I think of leadership, I typically think of politicians. I think of president. Um, I guess I could also say I think of like my parents or teachers, anyone important in my life that has a leadership role on me. But on a major scale, I'd say people like the president, famous historical figures, people like that are what I think of when I think of leadership.
Okay, and then what would come in mind when you think of the leaderships of when it came to civil rights and the movement we had and the differences many people made throughout our history with that movement?
Well, with civil rights leaders, the first one that comes to mind for me is Martin Luther King. And when I think of him, I think of the fact that he was very charismatic. He was great at getting his point across. He appealed to all types of people. And he was very relatable because he came from a southern background as a pastor, I believe it was. So he appealed to all people. And when I think of civil rights leaders, obviously they have to be able to appeal to all types of people since that's the entire point, to unite people. And yeah, there have been a lot of civil rights leaders that I can think of: Malcolm X, Susan B. Anthony, W.E.B. Du Bois, and these are all very powerful people who got their point across in a way that lots of people could understand it.
Yeah. So, not only with civil rights leaders, we also have our leaders that gave us our rights, such as Thomas Jefferson and James Madison, and also Susan B. Anthony, as you mentioned, who gave us our women's rights. And what do you think when it comes to them?
Well, when I think of people like Thomas Jefferson, you're talking about some of the founding fathers of the United States. So obviously these are people that are very old, centuries old, but yet their impact is still here today. Thomas Jefferson, a big part in writing the Declaration of Independence. He's also the third president of the United States, one of the most important historical figures in American history. Susan B. Anthony, as you mentioned, women's rights, which eventually, while they're not equal, women's rights have gotten way better. And Susan B. Anthony was a big part of that development. And other founding fathers like Benjamin Franklin, Alexander Hamilton, he helped create the Bank of the United States. So the founding fathers absolutely have put lots of things in place that are still in our country today, and our country would not exist without them. So they're definitely very important historical figures, just like the civil rights leaders.
Yep. All right, I have one more question for you, Noah. Who
Okay.
inspired you the most in history when it came to those civil rights and the rights of people? That can include Martin Luther King Jr., Rosa Parks, Thomas Jefferson, and so many more.
Oh, well, there's a lot of them, so it's a difficult question. But if I had to choose one, I'd say it'd probably be Martin Luther King, just because after centuries of having like slavery and institutionalized racism, what the man did in just a short period of time as well, considering how young he was and how young he was when he died. It's impressive all the change he actually brought upon this country by just being peacefully protesting, and he just appealed to
Yeah.
so many people in such a way that it's remarkable what occurred from what he did. Obviously the founding fathers have had such a big impact on this country as well. But when you look at a guy like Martin Luther King, he was probably, I'd say, the most important part. Obviously there were other ones like Malcolm X, but I'd say he was probably the most important civil rights leader. And what he did in such a short time changed this country so much to while we're still obviously not perfect, racism still exists, but what he did, in his time, and unfortunately was short-lived because he was assassinated. But what he did in his time on this planet, I mean, he was a great human being, and
Yeah,
he's helped to change our country way for the better. So definitely him.
I totally agree with you. He was our milestone for our country.
For sure, for sure. And especially because that was a very dark time in our history. Obviously, the Cold War and stuff. Um, the entire conflict with the Russians, Cuban Missile Crisis era. It was not a good era in our history. Of course, it was a very unsettling time. So for Martin Luther King to bring about a more positive message that we should, work together since we're all people, I think that was very good for our country at that time.
Yes, I agree.
So, yeah. Any other questions?
Nope, that is it for you. Thank you for joining me.
Of course. Now, what are your thoughts on civil rights leaders? Are there any favorites you have?
Um, I'd have to go with you with Martin Luther King Jr. because he is an inspiration because he did stop the feud between blacks and whites, and I've actually watched several documentaries over him, and it's just very interesting to watch the stuff that he did, the protests he made, the march on Washington. That was the biggest change in our history,
Absolutely. That was
and
that was
I just find
incredible.
him, yeah, it was, and I just find him very inspirational.
And if I could ask,
And of course, I agree. I'm sorry.
I was just gonna say, if I could ask, what exactly made you want to research civil rights and the founding fathers?
What was the question?
Um, what made you want to research civil rights and the founding fathers?
Um, that's a good question. Honestly, I was just sitting there one day and I was thinking to myself, and I was thinking about all the way we live today and how our world has changed for the better and all the people that have helped change our world. And so I just looked up a list of people that helped change our world, and I just put civil rights and founding fathers together, and I came up with an interesting and very inspiring topic.
I agree. I agree. And one last thing before we close, who would you say is the most influential founding father?
I would I really go for Thomas Jefferson because he made the Declaration of Independence and signed it. But however, James Madison did make the Bill of Rights. The Bill of Rights is our main 10 amendments that give us the right, like the right to bear arms, the right to freedom of speech and assembly and religion. It gives us the right to a speedy trial, to a lawyer if anything were to happen. And those rights are very important in our life because without them, who knows what kind of country we would be, the kind of government we would have. And I really look forward to researching more about James Madison just because he has done so much. And the
I
fact that everybody in our country follows those rights is also very intriguing as well.
I agree. I agree. Those rights are very important right now. Today, some of the most greatest rights we have were because of people like Thomas Jefferson and James Madison, and over 2 centuries ago to still be in place and have so much value is incredible to me.
Yeah, I totally agree with that.
All right, is there anything else you want to say before we end off this episode 1, or what?
Um, I think I had all the key points. You told me your most inspirational leader, and you told me what leadership meant, and I think those were the main questions that everybody needs to think about when it comes to this kind of topic.
I agree. So people watching, just remember, a lot of the things we have today are because of civil rights leaders and the founding fathers.
Yes, and I totally agree with that. And yes, I
And that'll do it for episode 1 of the Nighthawk Newscast. Thank you very much, Margery, for joining me for our discussion about civil rights leaders and the founding fathers. And in episode 2, we will be discussing the debate over violent video games, whether or not they cause violent behavior and aggression. We'll see you then, and thank you guys for watching.